United we're as strong as a mountain. United we...
This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek. And Friday, October the 3rd, there was a mass general strike in Italy around the issue of Palestine and against the genocide going on in Gaza. And this was in part launched by the action of dock workers in Italy and dock workers around Europe who have been organizing to blockade Israel. And joining us today is Jack Heyman. He's a retired member of ILWU Local 10. He was in Genova for a conference and has been active in the ILWU Local 10 in support of Palestinians, in support of a blockade of Israel. So welcome to our show, Jack.
Good to be here, Steve.
So Jack, why don't you talk about what is going on in Europe? And we're at this conference in Genova. What's happening in the labor movement there? Because it seems like there's an explosion of anger, movement of working people to say enough is enough. They want to end this genocide.
To begin with, this was a conference of European dock workers, and specifically those in the Mediterranean. And that's where the shipping comes into Israel. That's the main source, the Mediterranean. Of course, it comes in through the Red Sea also, but the Houthis have blocked that off effectively. The Port of Elan is not used because of the attacks by the Yemeni forces. So these were longshoremen, or they call them dock workers. It's only in this country that we use the expression longshore. But the dock workers there were from Greece, Italy, Spain, Cyprus, Germany, Turkey and Morocco were not present, but they sent statements. So the first day of the conference was the 26th, Friday, for the European dock workers only. And then it opened up the next day with other speakers, including a speaker from a new trade union formation there called the New Palestinian Federal Union. And he spoke for quite a while, and it was very inspiring to all of us there. So they came away with a program that they all voted on Friday, which I believe will be implemented. There was a lot of serious, robust discussion, and they announced that there will be a program basically around the principle of stopping military cargo to Israel. You may know this, that at last year's ILWU Longshore Convention in Vancouver, Canada, we in Local 10 submitted a resolution to refuse to handle military cargo for the war in Gaza and the West Bank committed by the genocidalist Israeli forces. So this is something that we're familiar with. The problem is that it was defeated actually at our convention because the international leadership took no open position on it, but everyone knew that they were opposed to it. And basically it went down in defeat. Local 10 still holds its position that we're opposed to loading military cargo for Israel for this genocidal war.
And the actions of port workers in Europe has encouraged people around the world that direct action is going to be taken. Why is it important that labor, dock workers and workers shut this down? Why is that critical, in fact?
Well, there have been many different strategies used to try to stop this Gaza war. As you know, the the flotilla, the global Sumud flotilla, had a lot of publicity around it. It's just recently been intercepted by the Israeli occupation forces. And that was one strategy. I think that was more symbolic than anything else, because while there's a famine going on there and they're in dire need of medical supplies and they were being carried by the flotilla, I think we knew in advance that the Israelis were going to stop them. They did in 2010 when the Mavi Marmara flotilla was going to Gaza. And in that case, they murdered 10 of the humanitarian aid workers. So that's one way people are trying to break the Israeli occupation and massacre and through starvation and bombing of the Palestinian population. So the other way is they're calling on their governments to take action. But that's not going to happen in Western Europe, the NATO powers. The U.S. is the main backer of the Zionist entity. And behind them stands West Germany, France, the UK. And while they have called for self-determination for Palestinian, most of those Western European countries, they keep supplying Israel with military cargo. That's hypocritical to the highest degree. And the way to really stop it is to stop that military cargo from going. And the dock workers around the world are at the nexus point where the shipping of this cargo goes. Not only by ships, it's mainly by ships, but also, as the Palestinian youth movement found here in the Bay Area, while the dock workers are refusing to load military cargo, the PYM found out that the Oakland airport is being used to ship cargo on a daily basis. And the PYM is having actually a large demonstration called tomorrow, Saturday, at Oscar Grant Plaza, which is in front of City Hall. So there are different strategies for trying to stop the slaughter of Palestinian people. And I think the most effective is when these dock workers refuse to load the ships. And this happened during our conference, actually, the second day of our conference, which was, I think, the 27th. While we were in session, there was a protest against the slaughter of Palestinians and the protesting cargo being shipped to Israel, war cargo. And CALP, C-A-L-P, one of the unions, one of the more militant unions in Italy, was marching with a lot of the youth in the city when they found out that there was the Zim New Zealand coming in to pick up 10 containers. This is in the port of Genova, coming in to pick up 10 containers going to Israel. And the CALP dock workers split off from the demonstration and took a couple hundred of the demonstrators with them. And the Israeli ship, the Zim New Zealand, was forced to leave without loading any of the military cargo. That's how you effectively stop the Israeli forces from massacring Palestinian people, by depriving them of the weaponry they need to commit these massacres.
Both the ILA and the ILWU stopped moving cargo to Russia during the Ukraine war. They said that they were going to support that. But it seems like, as far as the Palestinians, there's no similar action by the unions, the longshore unions in the United States.
Well, that's exactly right. As far as I see it, it's absolutely essential that the trade union movement mobilize against the Zionist government, which is committing a genocide. The opposite is true, I think, in Europe, with the Ukraine war was initiated by the NATO forces there. I mean, when the Soviet Union fell and Germany was going to add East Germany to unify the entire country as it was before World War II, there was a promise made by the U.S. to Gorbachev at the time that NATO would not move 1 inch further east. And yet, when Clinton was president, he just totally disregarded this, and the NATO kept expanding farther east. And finally, when Putin came to office, people were upset with Yeltsin's acting like a puppet of Western Europe and the U.S. And Putin came in, and he decided that this was a step too far, that they were going to try to have Ukraine join NATO. And so I think the war was precipitated by the West in the Ukraine war, and I think that the West, including NATO and the U.S., obviously, are the main culprits behind arming this Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people. The problem is that the labor movement in this country is becoming aligned with and part of the government. In this period, in fact, there was an interesting book by Leon Trotsky called Trade Unions and the Epic of Imperialist Decay. And what he outlines is that during this period, as capitalism grows, the trade union leadership becomes a fifth column for the bourgeois government. And that's, I think, what we've been seeing now. I'll give you a good example of that. The Longshore Union, ILWU, just a couple of years ago, had one of its members appointed to the Federal Maritime Commission. Max Vekich was his name. He's still on the Maritime Commission. One of the most effective dock workers unions in Europe that's stopping military cargo to the genocidal war is the La Cornidora in Spain. And they've refused to load military cargo to Israel. And the Spanish government has taken that same position. No military cargo to Israel. The Federal Maritime Commission has stepped in and is demanding of the La Cornidora dock workers and of the Spanish government that they not block military cargo from going to Israel. This is in counterposition to what the ILWU's position is, yet they have somebody sitting on this Federal Maritime Commission doing just the opposite. This is part of this whole process of trade union leadership becoming partners with the government. And that's the reason why right now it's so difficult to get actions taken by different unions. The ILA on the East Coast has historically been super patriotic. I mean, the last time I heard them on the East Coast boycotting military cargo was, or boycotting anything was, they boycotted Soviet ships during the Vietnam War because that was their protest in support of the U.S. imperialist war in Vietnam. They have a very reactionary position when it comes to taking boycott actions. Except I have to say, just today, there was a big protest in Port Elizabeth, New Jersey, and the ILA longshoremen did honor that picket line. That's very unusual for them. But in general, there's been a merging with these dock workers unions and the state. And not just dock workers, but the trade union bureaucracy in general. It's something that's very dangerous because collaboration with a capitalist government can only weaken the trade unions, the organized part of the working class.
And as part of that, this trade war that's going on, that's affecting longshore workers. It's affecting a lot of working people in this country. Isn't that the prelude to imperialist war, actually, trade war?
Of course it is. Yes, it's it's trade wars are the precipitated through competition between capitalist countries, and what happens is they end up leading to real war, military wars. It starts off with the trade tariffs and increases to military conflicts. And this is very serious now because the imperialist war that could evolve out of, well, not just the Ukraine, but also Israel. Let's not forget, they have military capacity too. We are, unfortunately, on the brink of maybe a third world war with this time nuclear weapons, and it would be precipitated by an economic war and by the Zionist effort to not only destroy what would be the nation of Palestine or Gaza, but they're acting as a cat's paw of U.S. imperialism throughout the Middle East. And this is Israel's agenda, to have a greater Israel that can dominate the entire Middle East with the backing of NATO and the United States. I think we saw very clearly when there was an attempt to have negotiations in Qatar, the Israeli government, Netanyahu, ordered a bombing precisely where these negotiations were going to take place, and the U.S. backed it. Look what Trump did in Iran when he just unilaterally, unprovoked, sent planes to bomb where facilities where nuclear power was being stored. So we are living in different dangerous times right now with the competition economically. I think you can see that the BRICS group of BRICS forces are really competing with the old imperialist powers of Western Europe and the United States. We had a delegation going to South Africa a couple of years ago, and it was celebrating the 50th anniversary of a general strike in Durban that turned into a protest against apartheid. And so we went over for that celebration. And as we were leaving, we were there for several days, and on our day of departure, there were military exercises by the BRICS countries because South Africa is one of the BRICS countries, and that's, Russia, China, Brazil, South Africa. They are building up an economic front that challenges what used to be the EU and Japan. So, all these wars are heating up in Ukraine, in Gaza and the West Bank, but also in Taiwan. That's ultimately, I think, where the U.S. is heading militarily, for a confrontation with China, a deformed workers' state.
And there have been brutal and frontal attacks on federal workers. 700,000 federal workers had their union rights taken away. They're destroying the NLRB. And now the government is shutting down, and they're bringing in one of the directors who wants to implement Project 2025, get rid of hundreds of thousands of workers. In the midst of that, the United States, it looks like, is preparing for an invasion of Venezuela. They position troops in Puerto Rico, and they're blowing ships out of the water near Venezuela. It seems that this adventurous U.S. imperialist policy is actually expanding in the midst of this economic crisis in the United States.
Yeah, I think what Trump is doing is trying to show that the U.S., which is clearly in decline economically and militarily, is still a dominant power to be dealt with. I think they've tried before to undermine and overthrow the Venezuela government. I think ultimately what they want to do is the thorn in their side is Cuba, which had a revolution, and it's still a worker state, a deformed worker state, but it poses a threat according to Marco Rubio. And so I think, yes, they're indiscriminately just bombing boats off the shore of Venezuela. There's a reaction to that because Brazil is a little bit more independent than some of the other South American and Central American countries. They're part of the BRICS. Actually, Venezuela is also, I believe. So there could be a serious confrontation. The governments in South America are real on. They're keeping their eye on what's happening in Venezuela because what the United States is doing, trying to maintain its control over the Western Hemisphere through the Monroe Doctrine, is a threat to every country in the Western Hemisphere. I think Colombia sees that. I know Brazil does for sure, and Venezuela is mobilizing its forces in anticipation of an invasion. You know, Trump is kind of bonkers when it comes to the military, and I think this meeting of all the generals and admirals was so bizarre. It never happened in U.S. history before, but I think he's trying to line up the military, not just for invasions against Venezuela, but also domestically. He's saying the enemy is within. Landing helicopters on a building in Chicago and raiding people, arresting people. He's got a war going on many, many fronts, and Venezuela is one of them.
And it seems like the union bureaucracy, the trade unions, despite the threat of martial law, the military attacks on cities, is completely silent. They're not really rallying members of the unions to prepare for military occupations of cities, much less U.S. invasions of Venezuela and the role of the United States now internationally in a military fashion. I mean, politically, the Democrats, of course, have supported these wars. And not only the Democrats, but the AFL-CIO leadership have supported through the Solidarity Center the attempt to overthrow the government of Venezuela, funding opposition and supporting that. I mean, it seems like the structure, the AFL-CIO structure, actually is, part of U.S. intervention internationally.
Well, yeah, that's what I was trying to say before. There's a growing together of the trade union bureaucracy with the state. Before this Solidarity Center, there was AFL, the American Institute for Free Labor Development, headed up by Lovestone and Brown, two CIA agents, trying to overthrow, or not trying to, helping to overthrow the government in Chile, the military dictatorship that was established in Argentina. This is Nicaragua, El Salvador. All these conflagrations are based on the U.S. Attempting to maintain its dominance in the Western Hemisphere. The trade union movement needs to step up, and what we really need to do is use the power that we have. These federal workers that are like going to the slaughterhouse, like lambs, like sheep, without a fight. It's incredible that the leadership just accepts all these cuts. There should have been a strike, and then besides the federal workers going out on strike, all the workers. We should have a general strike in this country over hundreds of thousands of federal workers being fired. But the trade union bureaucracy is actually complicit. They have no strategy, either the Democrats or the Republicans, for fighting these kinds of attacks on the working class. That's why I've always been in favor of a workers' party, a class struggle workers' party that would mobilize workers against attacks like these. It's sorely needed today to have an independent party of the working class. That Italy is on fire. Tomorrow there's going to be a general strike throughout the country. There'll be hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating in Rome and all the port cities. And it's because of the actions of the dock workers unions in Italy. So all power to the international working class.
I want to thank you very much. We've been talking with Jack Heyman, retired member of the ILWU Local 10, and just recently returned from an international dock workers conference in Genova, where they discussed action by dock workers to stop military shipments to Israel and expanding the action of working people, dock workers, and other workers around the world against this genocide in Gaza. So thanks for joining us.